Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nicki and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So today I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Emma Kingston to the show. So Emma is an adventurer, a writer, she's a teacher and a self-confessed map geek who specialises in bikepacking. And she's also the author of the recently published Bikepacking England book. And when Emma's publisher got in touch with me and said, would I like to speak to her? I was like, wow, this sounds really interesting because genuinely, I'd never even heard of bikepacking before. And because of that, I was like, I really want to find out more. And I checked out Emma's Instagram account and all these beautiful photos of her sort of solo on the top of these mountains, just her and her bike. And I was just like, I have to know more. And to me, bikepacking just sounded like one of the ultimate ways to have an everyday adventure. It's that sort of that concept that you can just get out and get into the middle of nowhere and travel, I guess, further than you probably could hiking. But I actually don't know that much more about it. So we'll be covering that in the interview as well, for those of you like me who'd never heard of it previously. And so, Emma, it's such a delight to have you to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Nicki. It's really lovely to be able to have a chat with you.
The first question has to be, what is bikepacking? And really, how did you get started on it?
Well, I have to say your little intro there sort of hit the nail on the head, really, Nicki, for someone who's professing to not know much about it. That was spot on, really. I guess bikepacking as a term is, it's a label which is helpful in some regards and in other ways isn't particularly. I'd say at its heart, it's just really getting your bike, strapping on some things onto your bike that you might need for a couple of days away, staying out overnight and just getting away from it all. You could, I guess, call it sort of bike touring or adventure cycling. But I think bikepacking perhaps as a term has been used gradually over the years to think about cycling more off-road, getting off the tarmac and sort of going into the sort of middle of nowhere if possible to get away from things. As to how I got into it, I'm a mountain biker traditionally, so I guess that was my upbringing, as well as walking and climbing and camping as a kid. I really got into cycling from an early age and I loved everything about it from when I was little. And I guess a lot of it was driven from a competitive side, having a twin brother. And so when he and my dad got their first full suspension bikes and sort of I tagged along to one of the trail centres in Wales with my little hybrid rally bike and tried to keep up with them. So yeah, cycling's been a really big part of my life since I was little. But I guess also I really enjoyed backpacking. So for me, bikepacking is the perfect synthesis of the two. Whilst I love backpacking and where it takes me, I definitely like the lack of sore feet that I get when I get to ride my bike. And like you said, you do get to sort of travel those longer distances and pass through a greater variety of landscapes in a shorter amount of time while still getting the benefit of slow travel, which I love.
That's so interesting. When you were talking, it sort of made me think a little bit. I mean, I love snowboarding, that sort of whole backcountry experience, actually, when you get away from the main trails and, and you're just out and not isolation, but that feeling of being alone in a very large space. And, and that can be so awe-inspiring as well as being incredible in the adventure itself. So you've obviously written this book around, which I can imagine must have been a real labour of love in lots of ways, if writing about something you're passionate about. And I just wondered, because I know it's more of a practical guide rather than sort of stories about, your own adventures. Although I know you've done the routes within the book as well. But I was just wondering, have you got any stories or any challenges you've faced whilst you've been out that have really made you either question your sanity and why you're doing it, or just made you think, gosh, I'm really impressed that I managed to overcome that in some ways?
Yeah. Oh, great question. I'd say that first of all, we were quite careful with the marketing of the book. So we haven't really described it as a guidebook, which is an interesting one. It sort of fills a hybrid space between Vertebrate Publishing, who published the book, do a lot of different books, from children's literature to climbing and cycling. And so they have a very much a technical guidebook side of things. And then they have a fiction and narrative section. And I guess my book sort of sits somewhere in the middle. Pitched the idea of a book that allowed me to talk about riding in a way that I hadn't really come across in perhaps mountain biking guides that I had read. And for me, riding is a lot more than a set of route directions written down in a very stark and clinical way of left, right, and straight across at the crossroads. And so it was really exciting to try out a different style of writing for me that got across what I enjoy about cycling and sort of captured the experience of riding through. So it's a sort of hybrid between an inspiration text and a guide, but it gives you just about enough to be able to do the routes. You get the routes themselves and you find out a lot about it. But within that, there's the inspirational element of the photos. And I think I did, really interesting you saying there that I guess my stories aren't really in there. And I was unpicking that the other day with a friend and thinking, looking back on it, when I read it, I definitely removed myself as much as possible from the text. And I don't know whether that was a conscious decision at the time about sort of that feeling of self-doubt and, that imposter syndrome and wanting to make sure that, I guess, it was myself not sort of so visible in the text, although I do flash up in quite a few of the pictures. And so for me, it was important that it captured what you might feel when you went riding there in the areas. And so each ride starts with a distilled moment in time, which is something I've experienced, but I'm trying not to write about it from my point of view because I don't want that experience to be forced on anyone else. I want it to be read as a sort of possibility that someone might experience if they went on one of these adventures. So I guess a little bit of me is in there, and it's a little bit of a guidebook and a little bit of an inspiration sleeve, but I think it perhaps fulfills that niche of what bikepacking is all about getting out and exploring and not necessarily being too weighed down by the technical aspect of turn taking and navigation. I guess your question was really, if I go back to that, was, even if those stories aren't completely sort of part of the narrative, whether I have experienced them. And I guess the answer to there is yes. In the 20 rides, there were quite a few incidents that I can definitely share. I think some of them are wonderful and are memorable and really stick with me, and others of them at the time were particularly trying and sort of perhaps scary in some instances. Certain memorable moments that really stand out are sort of those that happen on the edges of the day, where you might not traditionally be out if you were just having a sort of a day ride, where you see perhaps the sunset and the dusk emerging and watch, I guess, the colours change in the sky and the stars come out, or where I'm on the beach and everyone's left for the day and it's just me and the sound of the waves rasping on the shingle. It's just those special moments where you perhaps wouldn't have stopped to be there and immersed in the moment had you not been out on your bike. And I guess some of the more trying moments, there was one particular trip where in the space of 2 days I managed to get stung in the face by a wasp twice, which was not a pleasant experience. And I have to say, it's not a usual experience. This particular one was a rather trying event, and waking up the next morning was tricky to see and find my way back to the train station.
Oh my goodness.
But I'd say it probably shows what solo bikepacking is all about sometimes for me, that not everything goes to plan. I'm quite a planner, but I think you do have to be flexible to know that not everything will work out perfectly. And so sometimes what I find is that cycling on my own, it can be really rewarding to have to get around a problem you have. And so it's so empowering to have looked back and go, maybe I might not have been enjoying it at the time, but I definitely grew as a person. And so it was a worthwhile endeavour.
I mean, you've sort of alluded to it in your previous answer. And there are, I guess, the obvious benefits of being out in the fresh air and being able to get off the beaten track. What are some of the benefits that, and it could be actually a benefit of writing this book that you hadn't anticipated and sort of surprised you in a way that happened and you're like, oh, okay, where did that come from?
Well, I think it's probably worth noting that I haven't been a writer. I mean, I've kept a sort of an informal blog a couple of years ago, but really beyond the sort of English literature as a university degree, I haven't really taken that any further. And so I think for me, the writing process was a really interesting endeavour. And actually, subsequently, I've talked with quite a few authors as well who have sort of sympathised and I guess empathised with the writing process of how sometimes it can be incredibly frustrating but rewarding. And I think for me, it was a case of finding my voice and feeling confident with my writing, and then knowing that it would eventually emerge from scribblings in my study to this fully fledged book that would then one day go out into the world and face criticism or sort of, joy in sharing sort of the stories and the writing and I guess my experiences riding. And so I think probably the most wonderful thing that's come out of it is that whilst I've had to get more of a tough skin and just sort of embrace what it's like when you send anything you've made out into the real world, it's meant that I've got in contact with quite a lot of other riders that perhaps I wouldn't have reached out to in the past. I'm quite a reserved person, and I probably wouldn't be the first person to contact someone. So I think for me, it's been wonderful to see that the book has started to help quite a few women who I especially have been in contact with me to have said, do you know what, this is the first time that I felt seen in guidebook writing about cycling, having a woman represented on the front cover and through the pictures and the stories included. And so I think that was a rather lovely thing to hear, especially as anyone who's perhaps put themselves out there and made themselves vulnerable by sharing something that they've made, is that you're always open to feelings of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. And I think that really took me aback by how hard it hit me. And I wasn't expecting that, especially as I know that I've had a very privileged upbringing from the outdoors. I definitely haven't felt marginalised. And I think that's a very lucky position because I have friends and people who I've met through writing the book who have certainly not had that same feeling in the outdoors. And for me, I've always felt competent and empowered when I'm on my bike. And I felt that the trails are as equally like I have every right to be there. And I have been lucky to have, not met with opposition to that. Mostly because of how I was raised with some fantastically strong women. My mum is still riding her mountain bike into her mid-60s, and there's a dedication in the front that just says, to my mum, I hope I can tread like you when I'm 60, because she's such a fantastic sort of role model there. And I had lots of family friends of my mum and my dad who were brilliant female climbers and mountaineers. So for me, I was surrounded by those badass women, really, who just showed me what was sort of what I could be capable of. But for me, probably the moment that the book revealed where that disparity lay was with the moment I considered that I could perhaps occupy a space on an outdoor literature shelf that, if you look along them, are just predominantly written by white males. And so for me, that was a space which I did feel that I was muscling in on and occupying. And even if perhaps it wasn't outwardly given to me, that impression, I think perhaps it came from within, my feeling of perhaps not belonging and not perhaps living up to people's expectations. So I guess that perhaps is a reflection of the outdoor industry and the lack of female representation, that I didn't feel that my voice would be as valued or as appreciated, or perhaps taken as seriously. The good thing is that I haven't actually found that now that it's out on the shelves.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? Gosh, likewise. I mean, there's so many different threads I could pick up on, but I think what it made me think of is that, we tend to think of the comfort zone, that the challenge would be in the bike packing, in going off and being on your own and having to face those challenges by yourself, or like being stung in the face by a wasp twice, which sounds hideous, quite frankly. But those sort of moments where you're on your own or you're having to navigate something challenging. But for you, that sounds like, in a way, that was your comfort zone. The difficulty or the challenge lay in putting yourself out in the open and revealing something about yourself in what it sounds like is often quite a solo pursuit. You're opening that up to the world in a way and going, this is me, who I am when I'm doing this, even though, like you said, it's not your personal narrative, it's still your story.
And I think that's definitely something I had to navigate, Nicki, that actually a lot of women who've contacted me weren't interested so much. And I guess they were interested in the routes and they have started to ride them, and that's wonderful. But actually, I was taken aback by what they wanted to know about me, which wasn't the motivation behind it. But if it helps and encourages someone, then I'm all up for it. And I think someone pointed me in the direction. There's this wonderful group of ladies who set up the New Forest Off-Road Club, and that's one of the things that has been lovely about this book, that it's sort of opened my eyes to the sort of huge communities of women cyclists and out there that I didn't know about. But they often quote Brené Brown, who says that courage starts from showing up and letting ourselves be seen. And I guess I'm not comfortable with that, or wasn't. And I'm definitely finding that I can see that it's more useful if you do show up and make yourself seen, to put yourself out there and show that it can be done.
And it's easy to say, but actually the experience of doing it is a very, very different thing, and very challenging, I think, for so many of us. And I was just thinking about your point about, the influence of these incredible, strong female role models that you've had in your life, and in a way you transitioning into that place of being a role model for others. Like you said, people reaching out to you now and saying, what you've done has inspired me, what you've written has inspired me. And I'm
still getting used to that, because that's still very strange.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're used to the adventure is about you getting out with your bike, and that's what it's been about for you, actually being in that place of visibility and in that position. Yeah, it's absolutely a transition. So I was just wondering, I mean, what's next for you? Where would you like to go with this? Do you have other books in mind? Do you have other adventures in mind?
I think I'm always someone who has an adventure sort of, I guess, cooked up in the back of my head. I think lockdown was brilliant for that. I have a sort of a huge bank of routes which I sort of spent time creating, which some are fully formed, some are in pieces, sort of that link little bits of trail that I've found and want to sort of explore more. And sometimes actually routes just spring up from perhaps something I've read about an area, or like a monument, or a sort of, a cave or a beach or a woodland that I really want to go and see. And then that sparks up a whole sort of idea for a route. So I've got quite a few that I'm just really, eager to have a ride of. There's still lots in England. I think the guidebook is certainly not meant to be a catch-all. It's not saying this is the definitive list of routes. It's meant to be a springboard to help get people out on their bike and enjoying things. I think it's been one of my absolute favourite routes was up in the Lake District. So I have to say I can't wait to get up there soon, hopefully this summer. And actually, when I rode the route, I did it in the autumn, and my family have been up there since I was a baby every year in the autumn. And I realised I haven't actually ever ridden my bike in the Lake District outside of that season where everything is that burnt orange and the reflections are just magical. And in the mornings you get the low-lying mist in the valleys over the lakes. And so actually I'm just really excited to go and ride in a different season and see what that brings to the ride as a new flavour. Plus there's Wales and Scotland, which I can't wait to go and have an explore of.
Wow, so much. I mean, the wonderful thing is, I guess, is having all of those different ideas as well, that it's it's like you said, it's not a complete project, and then it sparks off other ideas for other things that you want to do too. So I'm going to ask you next, the one question I ask all of my guests who come on the podcast, and it's, if someone's listening to this and they think, wow, I've not heard of bike packing, but it sounds fabulous, I'd love to give that a go. Or they just want to get started on an adventure of their own, whether it might be writing a book as well. I mean, what's one piece of advice you would give them?
I think I'm not going to go for just do it, because that's just not helpful in any way. That would probably describe how I got into it. But I think it's definitely got to be a personal thing where if you need to take it slowly, you do. Go with friends. But I think probably my one bit of advice would be to say, don't just expect it to be straightforward on your first time you do it. I would say prepare to be, flexible and to embrace that sense of uncertainty if it comes. And if you find yourself halfway around and you're finding it hard, there's no shame in, hopping on a train or finding a shortcut back. I think it's not a failure, it's just a different adventure that you've had in the end. So I would say just embrace what comes your way and be prepared to be fluid and flexible. And of course, if you find something on the way that you absolutely like the look of and you're worried that you perhaps won't get around the whole route, I would say take your time to make that decision. I think some of my best trips have been when I've stopped and decided actually that I want to go and visit that house or ruin or single track on the side, and I'll just leave the route and go and see where it takes me. Be flexible and don't be afraid to change things if it's not going to plan.
That's such a brilliant note to end on. And I think I love that bit you said about it's not a failure to do something differently or to change your mind or to take a detour. It's just a different adventure. I think that's a perfect way to end this show. So before we go, if people want to know more about you, about the book, where can they go?
So the book is published by Vertebrate Publishing. And so if you head to their website, they have a 20% off website wide. And then if you sign up to their website newsletter, I believe you get an extra 5% off, and it's free postage and packaging. But the book is also available on, bookshop.com, Waterstones, Boys, any sort of, larger retailer. And it's also been sent out to quite a few small ones. So there's a lovely bookshop in Ambleside, which is stocking it. And the route actually goes almost past the shop window.
Oh, that's wonderful. And if people want to find out more about you and your adventures, where can they go for that?
So I'm currently posting photo series and stories from the trails up on my Instagram. So that's emma.outdoors. You can find me on Twitter as well, although I'm not quite as active on there. And then I do have a website, emmaoutdoors.com as well.
Amazing. And we'll pop all those links into the show notes for you as well, so people can go and find you. Emma, thank you so much. That's been absolutely brilliant. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And yes, it makes me want to go and get on my bike and find somewhere to go. And in fact, I saw that you posted a picture of the South Downs Trail, which isn't that far from me. So I'm like, right, that'll be on my list. I just need to do something with the kids first, but that's on my plan. So thank you so much for sharing all that wonderful knowledge and for your honesty on your experience too. It's hugely appreciated, and lovely to speak, and good luck with the book as well.
Oh, thanks, Nicki. Cheers for having me on.
Take care. Bye. So I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Emma. I learned quite a lot this week, actually. Like I said, bikepacking was something really new to me. So it was great to be able to explore a new idea, a new possibility. It's definitely something I want to get more involved with. So this week I wanted to pick up on the point that Emma made about visibility and how challenging that can be, actually, to feel that we are putting ourselves out there, expressing our opinions, expressing our ideas, being visible, putting ourselves at the forefront of something rather than shining a light on other people, which is also a really important thing to do. And it was really interesting because it's certainly something that I've wrestled with this podcast as well, that the aim of the podcast is very much to shine a light on the incredible guests that I speak to and their amazing experiences as well. But I think at some level, it also requires me to show up and be visible. And even in selecting the guests and in the conversations we choose to have, that is about visibility and being willing to own that and take responsibility for that to some extent. And I think what's really interesting is that sometimes we choose that visibility, sometimes it is forced upon us in some ways. But however we go about it, it's trying to find a way that feels comfortable to us. And as Emma made the point so brilliantly, that actually sometimes by hiding away, we remove the possibility of helping others. And that getting comfortable with being out there, with being visible, is also about allowing the possibility that you have something valuable to share and that actually others will learn from that too. So I'm going to leave it there this week. I would really love you to reflect on visibility and how comfortable you are within that as well. And that putting yourself out there and showing up. One of the things I've definitely found is actually the more you do it, the more you practice, like so many other things, the easier it definitely becomes. But like every adventure, taking that very first step and being vulnerable and being prepared to share even a slight part of you, whether it's on an Instagram square or with friends or with family, however that manifests itself. Taking that first step can be pretty daunting, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So I'd love to know what you think. As always, please do get in touch, reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram, Resilience at Work. You can find me on Facebook in the Everyday Adventure Club. You can visit my website, resiliencework.co.uk, and drop me a message that way. As always, love to hear from you. And if you've enjoyed this episode and the episodes so far, please do leave me a review on your favorite platform. It makes so much of a difference, and always lovely to know what you think and your thoughts as well. Otherwise, gosh, we're getting through season 3 quite quickly now. I've only got a few more episodes left to share with you, but I will be back next week. I have another wonderful guest for you, and I cannot wait to see you there. Speak to you soon. Take care. Bye.